I should have died last night. That's the simple, impossible truth. By every earthly measure, I was gone. My heart had stopped. My body was charred and broken. They had already called my mother. But I'm sitting here now, breathing, blinking, alive. And not because of science, not because of luck, but because I saw something on the other side, someone. But I'll get to that. First, you have to understand who I was, before the fire, before the light. I've always been a dreamer. I suppose that's how I ended up at Disney. There's something sacred about bringing joy to strangers. I know that might sound cheesy, especially coming from someone who spent the last 8 years of her life working in the most manufactured, happiness engine in the world. But for me, it was never fake. It was a calling, a ministry in its own way. I worked in entertainment operations at Epcot, specifically the France Pavilion. I wasn't a princess or a mascot. I was a cast coordinator, handling show schedules, overseeing costume performers, making sure Remy's Ratatouille adventure ran smoothly, and that every guest, every child with wide eyes and every tired parent pretending to believe, felt the magic. And I loved it. Not because it was always easy. It wasn't. We worked long hours, especially during the holidays. We smiled through blisters and burnout. I knew the backstage tunnels better than I knew my own apartment. But every time, a kid hugged a character and looked up like they were meeting royalty. I remembered why I was there. Still, over the past couple years, something had started to change inside me. I was raised Christian. Not nominally. I mean, Sunday morning pews, Wednesday night youth group, Bible quiz tournaments. I believed. I really did. But somewhere between adulting and the daily grind, I stopped praying. Not out of rebellion, more like slow erosion. Faith didn't feel practical anymore. When you're trying to pay rent in Orlando, remember 17 different costume rotation schedules, and answer emails while inhaling a cold sandwich on your 10-minute break, the idea of divine intervention feels distant. I'd go to church when I could, but more out of obligation than hunger. I sang the songs, nodded at the sermons, smiled politely in the lobby, but inside, I was hollow, numb. I didn't doubt God existed exactly. I just wasn't sure he noticed me anymore. Or maybe I was the one who'd gone invisible. Either way, we'd stopped talking, and I'd learned how to hide that well. Most of us do, don't we? We learn how to smile wide enough that no one sees the crack behind it. I poured my identity into work instead. Disney became my refuge, my rhythm. There was something oddly comforting about the repetition. Clock in, run the show, handle the guests, clock out. Like a well-rehearsed parade, it all marched along. Predictable. Safe. Until last night. But I'm not ready to talk about that yet. Because before the smoke and the screaming and the chaos, there was just stillness. That golden hour quiet before the fireworks show. The soft shuffle of guests wandering past crepes and cobblestone. The lazy hum of ambient music piped through hidden speakers. The way the setting sun hit the Eiffel Tower replica just right, like Paris was smiling at us through the trees. That evening, I was standing at my usual spot backstage, headset on, clipboard in hand, watching the performers prep for the final round of appearances. I remember thinking how perfect the sky looked, painted in sherbet colors, and how, despite the usual fatigue tugging at my bones, I felt oddly at peace, content even. It was the kind of evening that makes you forget the world is broken, and yet, somewhere inside me, I still felt the echo of the question I'd been avoiding for months. Does any of this mean anything? I looked around at the families laughing, cast members waving, lights flickering to life around the lagoon. It was beautiful. And yet, was it all just lights and illusions? What if everything I'd built my life around, faith, joy, purpose, was just another performance? I didn't have an answer. Just that slow, aching ache of emptiness beneath the surface. That tug that said, something's missing. And I didn't know what to do with that. So I did what I always did. Pushed it down, tightened the headset on my ear, and got back to work. Because the show must go on, right? Even when the soul feels silent. Even when you can't hear God anymore. Even when you're not sure if you ever really could. But some questions, no matter how deep you bury them, have a way of clawing back up. And mine was about to be answered, in the most terrifying, beautiful way imaginable. Because what I didn't know in that moment, standing in the safety of familiarity, going through the motions of another ordinary evening, was that everything was about to change. Everything. The fire started with a noise I couldn't place, a low thud, then a scent, chemical, wrong, like burning plastic. Then the screaming began. And in a matter of seconds, my world would be reduced to ash. I turned instinctively toward the backstage corridor, just in time to see a thick plume of smoke rolling around the corner like a living thing, black, choking, fast. It didn't rise, like you'd expect smoke to rise. It charged, low and heavy, hugging the ground like it knew exactly where it was going, and it was heading straight for us. "Backstage fire!" Someone yelled through the headset, panic spiking through the usually calm, composed voices of operations. "France Pavilion. Cooler's gone up. Get everyone out now." My body moved before my brain caught up. "Evacuate," I shouted, yanking the emergency override on the Remy attraction. The cheerful French dialogue playing over the ride speakers cut to static. Overhead, emergency lights flashed red, bathing everything in a sick, pulsing glow. A split second later, the doors flung open and dozens of startled guests began to spill out into the courtyard, clutching their children, coughing. "Confused. Keep moving. This way, folks, right this way." I guided them past the creperie, heart hammering, the air getting thicker with each breath. The acrid stench of burning insulation hit my nose, sharp and metallic. People were crying. Kids were screaming. Phones were out, recording. Some guests thought it was all a drill, part of the show. It wasn't. A fellow cast member, Jordan, sprinted toward me, face streaked with soot. "It's not just the cooler. It's spread to the tunnels. Electrical fire. We've got performers stuck backstage. I'll..." "Go," I said without thinking. "Emily, don't be an idiot." But I was already running. The smoke backstage was a wall. My eyes burned. I dropped low, crawling under it, feeling my way through familiar territory turned foreign. I passed the wardrobe closet, now glowing faintly behind the cracked frame, like a furnace from within. Fire licked the walls in odd places, non-linear, chaotic, like the blaze had its own logic. Cables dangled from the ceiling like dead vines. The air was a soup of heat and confusion. "Hello?" I shouted hoarsely. "Is anyone back here?" A muffled cry answered. I followed the sound, coughing, pushing through the thickening smoke until I found them. 2 character performers, still in partial costume, huddled near a utility door that had jammed shut. It stuck. One of them, Claire, sobbed. Her oversized rat head was discarded beside her, revealing tear-streaked cheeks and panicked eyes. "We couldn't get out." "I've got you," I said, gripping the door handle. It was blistering hot. I yanked, using every bit of strength I had left. With a shudder, it gave way. A rush of cooler air hit us, only slightly less toxic, but it was hope. "Go!" I shouted. "Now!" They ran. I turned to follow, but the hallway behind me collapsed in a roar of flame. The exit was gone. My lungs burned. My legs turned to jelly. I stumbled backward, disoriented, reaching for my radio, but all I got was static. The heat was unbearable, pressing in from every angle. I felt my skin tightening, my heart pounding. The smoke was a living thing now, coiling around my body, whispering threats in every breath. And then the world tilted. I fell. I didn't even know there was a lower level. Just an old maintenance shaft, half collapsed. My foot slipped through a weakened floor panel, and in an instant I was falling, crashing down into darkness, slamming into concrete. The pain exploded through me like firecrackers, my shoulder, my ribs, my legs. Everything went white. Silence. High-pitched ringing filled my ears, like the aftermath of a bomb. I couldn't move. I tried to call for help, but nothing came out. The air was thick with soot, and I couldn't tell if it was night or day anymore. I could smell my own hair burning. I could hear the crack and pop of fire overhead. This is it, I thought. This is how I go. Alone, in the dark, under Disney World. I thought about my mom, my sister in Chicago, the dog I never got around to adopting. All the things I said I'd do someday. I thought about God, not in a prayerful way, just curious. Would he meet me here, or had I drifted too far? Then everything stopped. The pain vanished. The noise faded. The heat lifted. I was floating. At first, I thought I was dreaming, my brain's final flicker before death. But this was too real, too clear. I looked down and saw me, crumpled, broken, the fire still raging above, EMTs swarming in, one of them calling for a medic, fast. They didn't see me standing there, barefoot, whole, surrounded by a strange golden light. What? I whispered, but the word didn't come from my mouth. It came from somewhere deeper. And then I was somewhere else. In a single blink, the chaos of the fire dissolved. The roaring flames, the broken concrete, the sirens, all gone. Replaced by a silence so full, so complete, it thrummed in my bones. I was standing in a vast open space that wasn't quite sky and wasn't quite land. Light moved like water, washing everything in gold and white, and something deeper too. Something I didn't have a name for. Peace. But more than that. Love. The kind of love that sees everything, every regret, every failure, every forgotten prayer, and still wraps around you without question. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. I wasn't alone. There was someone there, walking toward me, radiant and human, and not human at once. A man, cloaked in light. His eyes held galaxies. I knew his name before he spoke it. Emily, he said, and I fell to my knees. But before I could speak, before I could even begin to ask the 1,000 questions erupting inside me, he reached out his hand and said something that shattered everything I thought I knew. You were never alone, even in the silence. And then he turned. Behind him, the light began to shift, and what I saw there made my soul tremble. Behind him, behind Jesus, was a veil of light, thin and living, like gauze made of sunbeams, gently rippling without wind. And through it, I saw what felt like everything, not in some overwhelming, encyclopedic sense, but in a deeply human way. Like memory and truth and eternity had all been laid bare at once, and my soul knew how to interpret it, even if my mind couldn't. I saw a world covered in noise. Cities throbbed with busyness, millions of people hurrying, scrolling, shouting, pretending. Faces lit by screens but dark behind the eyes. I saw smiles that didn't reach the heart, hands that touched without love, hearts that beat with apathy like it was oxygen. I saw a mother ignore her weeping child to record a perfect video. I saw a man surrounded by people but suffocating in loneliness. I saw church buildings full of worshipers mouthing songs they didn't believe anymore. sermons echoing in rooms where no one was really listening. I felt none of it as judgment, only grief. Holy, aching grief. Not from Jesus, but in him. Like he carried it all. Like he'd never stopped carrying it. "You see now?" he said quietly, stepping beside me. His voice was more than sound. It was being. It moved through me like music made of truth. "They're so disconnected," I whispered, barely able to speak around the lump in my spirit. "They're all asleep, even the ones who think they're awake." He nodded slowly. "The world has traded its soul for noise. Many have forgotten how to be still, to hear, to look." Tears welled up in my eyes. I was one of them. His eyes locked onto mine, deep, endless, not like looking at someone, but through time itself. "You still are, Emily, but you've also been called." My breath caught. "Called to what?" "To remember," he said, "and then to remind." Before I could answer, the vision shifted. The veil of light opened wider, revealing something more beautiful than I could put into words. It wasn't heaven, not exactly, at least not like I'd imagined. It was more real than any reality I'd ever known. The colors had a kind of sound, the light had shape, and the air felt alive. Every molecule hummed with love so fierce and so pure it made my knees buckle. There were others too, souls, I think, walking or floating or being in this place. Some were laughing with joy that pulsed like bells. Some knelt in quiet reverence. I recognized none of them, and all of them, as if we were connected at a level deeper than blood. Some looked toward me, eyes full of welcome, not surprise, like they'd known I'd come. I wanted to stay. Everything in me ached to stay. But he turned, to me again, and there was sorrow in his gaze. "You cannot stay," he said. I choked on the wave of disappointment. "But why show me this if I can't be part of it?" "You are part of it," he said gently. "But your time there isn't over." There, meaning Earth, the noise, the chaos, the confusion. My broken body still lying beneath charred concrete. "I don't know how to go back," I whispered. "Not after this. How can I ever live the same again?" "You weren't meant to," he said. "That's the point." He placed a hand over my chest and I gasped, not from pain but from knowing. In that instant, I saw my life with terrifying clarity, not as a timeline of events, but as a tapestry of moments I had misunderstood. I saw where I had ignored the whispers of the Spirit. I saw every time I'd numbed myself with distraction, when God had been trying to speak through stillness. I saw prayers I thought went unanswered, but had been answered in ways I never recognized. I saw how even my doubts had been a kind of prayer, an invitation for God to reveal himself deeper. Wept. "I wasted so much," he smiled, not with pity but with promise. "Nothing is wasted in the hands of the Redeemer." Then he opened his other hand, and in it, a flame flickered. Not fire like I'd just escaped, but something gentler, sacred, alive. "This is the light I place in you," he said. "The world is darker now than it's ever been. Not because I have hidden myself, but because many have chosen shadows. You must carry this back. You must tell them." My hands trembled as he placed the flame inside me. Not onto me, but into me. It didn't burn. It belonged. I don't remember agreeing. I just remember willing it. And then everything began to dissolve. "No, wait." I reached for him, terrified to leave, terrified to forget. "What if they don't believe me?" "They won't," he said plainly. "Not all. Some will laugh, some will dismiss, but others will remember something long buried in their souls, and they'll awaken." His voice grew faint, like a song being carried away on wind. Go, Emily. You have seen what they've forgotten. Remind them. Shine. And with that, the light fractured, splintered into stars. I fell through them. I don't know how long I was gone. Time didn't exist where I'd been. But suddenly I was slammed back into weight. Breath, pain, sirens, cold air biting my skin, voices shouting, "Clear!" A jolt through my chest. My body arched. I screamed. I was back. Alive. Gasping on a hospital bed, surrounded by startled medics who'd just declared the time of death 2 minutes earlier. They stared at me like they'd seen a ghost. Maybe they had. I blinked, tears pouring down my temples. My throat was raw. My body ached in a dozen places. And yet, through it all, that flame inside me burned steady. Steady, but not untouched. Because in those first moments back in the world, I felt something else. A shadow. Not from within, but nearby. Watching. Waiting. Because whatever had met me in the light had enemies in the dark. That was the first thing I felt when I came back. Not the pain, not the hospital bed, not even the burning ache in my lungs as I took my first breath in the land of the living. It was opposition. A weight pressing against me. Not physical, not explainable, but thick, oppressive, cold. Like something unseen had been waiting for me, hoping I wouldn't come back. And now that I had, it was angry. I opened my eyes to chaos. Bright lights, shouted orders, beeping monitors. A nurse dropped a clipboard. One of the paramedics staggered back, eyes wide, whispering something. About a miracle. I heard a voice crackle through a hospital radio. Patient Whitmore just resuscitated. I repeat, she's conscious. I was surrounded, but I had never felt more alone. Emily, someone gasped. Can you hear me? I nodded slowly. My body screamed in protest. Every inch of skin felt raw, as if I were still inside the fire. But deeper than that pain was knowledge. I had been sent back with a purpose, and it wasn't just to heal. It was to speak. But how do you explain heaven to people who've only known earth? That first night, the doctors ran every test imaginable. They couldn't explain it. I'd flatlined for over 4 minutes. No oxygen, no brain activity, internal injuries, smoke inhalation. The notes in my file included words like inexplicable, unprecedented, and possible recording error. Anything but what it really was. I tried to tell one nurse what I saw. Her face changed. At first, polite disbelief, then awkward nodding, and then the excuse to leave. They didn't want to hear it, or maybe they couldn't. Even my mom, when she arrived, eyes swollen from crying, didn't know what to do with what I told her. I saw him, Mom, I whispered, tears in my voice. Jesus, he spoke to me. He showed me things I can't explain. She squeezed my hand tightly. Baby, you were in shock. You nearly died. It could have been the medicine, your brain trying to comfort you. It doesn't mean it wasn't real to you. She meant well, but I could see it in her eyes. The line between concern and fear. They didn't believe me, but something else happened too. Late that night, as the machines beeped softly around me, a janitor came in to mop the floors. He was older, maybe late 60s, with tired eyes and a quiet soul. He didn't say much, just worked in silence. Then, as he turned to leave, he paused at the door. I heard what you told the nurse, he said without turning around. I froze. I've seen the light too, he whispered. Long time ago, Vietnam. Nobody believed me either. But don't stop talking. The ones meant to hear it, they will. And then he was gone. That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't just about telling. It was about planting. Not everyone was ready to believe, but some were desperate to remember. I started small. Quiet conversations with coworkers who visited me in the hospital. I told them about the peace I felt, about the fire that didn't consume me, about the voice that told me I wasn't alone. Some looked uncomfortable. Some smiled politely and changed the subject. But a few leaned in. They didn't say much, but their eyes gave them away. They were listening with their souls. One, a newer cast member named Kayla, came back a few days later with tears in her eyes. "I don't know what I believe," she said, "but something in me woke up when you talked. Like I've been asleep for years and didn't even know it." That was the beginning. The stories started spreading. Whispers in break rooms, DMs on Instagram. People I hadn't talked to in years sending messages like, "I heard what happened. Can we talk?" And with every seed planted, the opposition pushed harder. My recovery was slow. Strange complications kept arising. Sudden fevers. Machines malfunctioning in the night. One nurse told me, off the record, that twice, my monitors flatlined for a few seconds when no one was even touching me. Then came the dreams. Dark figures. Cold hands. Whispers that said I was crazy, that no one would ever believe me, that I would ruin my life if I kept speaking. But the flame inside me never went out. One night, I was alone in my hospital room, scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures of the France Pavilion, smiling guests, the glowing fountains of Epcot at night, and I started to cry. Not because I missed it, but because I finally saw what I'd never seen before. Behind every smile was hunger. Behind every perfect moment was a soul searching for something more. And I had been right in the middle of it, handing out magic like candy, when what they needed was truth. Real, breathing, eternal truth. And I had it now. Not all of it, but enough to start the conversation. I made a promise to God that night. A whispered vow under flickering fluorescent light. I would speak. I would burn quietly if I had to. And I would shine in the dark until someone else remembered the light. But the moment I said it, the shadows moved. The room chilled. The monitors flickered. And in the corner, just for a second, I saw something impossible. Not imagined. Not dreamed. A figure. Watching. Smiling. And I realized this wasn't just about sharing light. It was about fighting darkness, because I hadn't come back to comfort people. I'd come back to wake them, and not everyone wants to be awakened. That's what I had to learn next. You think, after seeing what I saw, that people would line up to hear, that they'd be desperate for truth, that everyone would drop their distractions and run toward the light the moment they saw a flicker. But I was wrong. The fire that nearly ended me opened my eyes, but the world I came back to was still asleep, wrapped in a warm, numbing dream. And most didn't want to wake up. Some were polite. Some laughed. A few got angry. I shared what I'd seen at churches, podcasts, even a local news interview that edited out every mention of Jesus. They liked the survival story, the against all odds miracle. But the moment I talked about the man in the light, the mission, the truth behind the veil, they cut to commercial. I was labeled delusional, over-medicated, trauma brain. But I kept going. Because I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was trying to remind them. You can feel it too, can't you? That low hum beneath your everyday life. The ache you push down with noise and distraction. The thing you almost feel when you're alone at night, staring at a ceiling that doesn't answer back. It's the question behind all questions. Is this it? I'm telling you, it's not. You were made for more than survival, more than distraction, More than applause and paychecks and perfect selfies and calendar alerts. You were made for connection. With God, with each other, with something eternal. But we forgot. We forgot so deeply we started calling the fake things real and the real things crazy. That's the battle. Not good versus evil in some cartoon way, but clarity versus confusion. Stillness versus noise. Truth versus comfort. And I didn't come back just to tell a story. I came back to ask you something. What if I'm not the only one who's been called to remember? What if you felt the flicker of that same flame and just didn't know what to do with it? What if the thing you've been searching for is already searching for you? Look, I'm not a preacher. I'm not a prophet. I still work at Disney, though now I see it differently. The cast members I used to hustle past on the way to meetings. Now I stop. I listen. I speak life. I carry that quiet fire everywhere. I go like a lamp behind my ribs, not to impress, but to invite. And slowly people have started waking up. Kayla, the cast member I mentioned, she started hosting a small prayer circle before park opening, right there in the back corridors beside racks of Mickey ears and character gloves. Last week, 9 people showed up. One of them had never prayed in her life. Jordan, the one who tried to stop me from going into the fire. He told me he started reading scripture again for the first time since college. Not because I pushed him, but because, in his words, if what you saw is real, then I want to remember too. But it's not just about them. It's about you, whoever you are, wherever you are. If you're hearing my voice or reading my words, you're part of this moment, not by accident, not by coincidence. So here it is, the message I nearly died for. You are seen. You are not forgotten. Heaven is real, and Jesus is not some distant idea, or symbol or storybook savior. He is here. He is now. He is more alive than anything you've ever touched, more real than the ground beneath your feet. And he has not given up on you. He walked me through fire, and he sent me back because your soul matters that much to him. Not because you're perfect, but because you're loved. And if the darkness has been loud in your life, if the silence has screamed, if you've ever wondered whether the light could still reach you, I'm here to tell you, it already has. You wouldn't be reading this if it hadn't. This world will keep spinning. The noise will keep rising. People will scroll past, tune out, forget. That's fine. But not you. Not this time. Something deeper stirred inside you as you listened. I know it did. That's not emotion. That's memory. That's your soul recognizing the voice of the one who made it. So what now? Don't wait for a fire to wake you. Don't wait to flatline before you start really living. Go somewhere quiet tonight. Turn off the world. Just sit. Let the silence speak. Ask him if he's real. Ask him to remind you of what you already know. He will, and when he does, when that light flickers to life inside you, don't hide it. Don't analyze it to death. Just let it burn. Let it lead you. Let it wake others. Because there are people in your life right now, friends, co-workers, strangers, who are drowning in darkness and don't even know it. And they need someone to show them a spark. You don't have to preach. You just have to shine. That's it. That's the mission. That's why I came back. Not to impress you, but to awaken you. I should have died in that fire. But instead, I came, back carrying something eternal. And now, I'm passing it to you. The question is, what will you do with it? My name is Emily Whitmore. I work at the most magical place on earth. But I've seen something far greater than fireworks or fairy tales. I've seen the face of Jesus. I've heard the call to remember. And now, every day, I choose to live like it matters, to walk like I've seen the other side. To speak like hope isn't a fantasy, it's a person. If I can awaken even one more soul to that truth, then every scar was worth it. So here's my prayer for you. Don't just chase light, become it. Shine, even if your voice shakes. Remember, even the smallest flame defies the dark, and sometimes all it takes to change a life is one awakened soul willing to speak.